The alarm did not warble. It screamed, three flat tones that meant only one thing on any ship built after the Kethrani Accords. And that meaning was simple and absolute. Class 9, containment breach. Do not engage. I was standing in the observation corridor outside Biolab 4, logging routine data, when the inner seal of that lab hissed open on its own. A fault in the interlock, we would learn later. A half-second failure that should never have happened. In that half-second, something the color of a deep bruise slid out across the deck plating, low and fast, and wrong in a way my body understood before my mind caught up. Every hair on my arms lifted at once. My gills flared without my permission. I have flown through weapons fire during the border skirmishes, and never felt what I felt in that corridor. A bone-deep, species-wide, ancient scream rising from somewhere beneath language itself. Run. Get away. This will kill you. So I ran. Everyone ran. Daniel from engineering, Grace from the science deck, even the two security officers whose entire training was built around not running. They ran too, because the chemical signal a Class 9 organism sheds is not just a smell. It is a broadcast, shaped by millions of years of separate evolution across 100 different worlds, and it says the same thing to every nose built to catch it. Danger. Flee. Now. The bulkhead came down behind me half a second too early. Later I understood that this saved the rest of the deck from exposure. In that moment, I only understood that it had sealed me inside a 12-meter corridor with the creature, and there was nowhere left to go. And Claire. Dr. Claire Bennett was still standing near the specimen cart when the bulkhead fell. For one terrible second I thought she had frozen the same way I had, locked in place by the same wave of fear that had turned the rest of us into fleeing animals. She had not frozen. She was opening her medical kit. "Doctor," I said, my voice coming out broken, half clicks and half words, because my translator could not keep pace with my panic. "Doctor, get back. Get away from it." "It is in distress," she said, calm as if she were reading numbers off a screen instead of watching a mass of shifting corrosive tissue ripple across the deck toward us. "Look at the pattern of its movement. That is not an attack posture. That is a creature in pain." I did not know what pain looked like on something like that. I only knew what every fiber of my body was screaming at me, and it was not diagnose, it was survive. She walked toward it. I have replayed that image countless times since. Small, steady, wrapped in a plain white coat, no weapon in her hand, only a hypospray drawn from her kit, walking straight into the one thing every thinking species in known space has been built by billions of years of separate evolution to run from. I did not understand it then. I understand it a little better now, because later, hands still shaking, voice still catching, I asked her directly, "Were you not afraid?" She had shrugged, checking the readout on the hypospray without looking up. Afraid of what? I could not smell anything. That is the part nobody explains to you, until you have served beside a human. Every other species carries some old alarm, wired straight into instinct. A smell, a shape, a texture, that means danger, before the mind has even finished perceiving it. It kept our ancestors alive on 100 different worlds. It also means that when something like a Class 9 organism breaks loose, every one of us becomes, for a few critical seconds, a fleeing animal, instead of a reasoning being. Humans do not have that bell. Nobody fully agrees on why. Some say humanity's worst threats were always other humans, not chemical ones, so the old warning systems never had a reason to develop. Whatever the cause, when the chemical signal that turns the rest of us to jelly reaches a human nervous system, it lands on nothing at all. No ancient wiring lights up, no inherited scream. Just a person, looking at a patient and deciding what is wrong with it. But I am ahead of myself. Let me start from where the real trouble began, 3 days earlier, when the creature first came aboard. The long correlation had been sent to a quarantined biosphere on the edge of surveyed space, a world the science division had nicknamed the Garden, though nothing about it looked gentle from orbit. The planet's surface churned with storms of pale spores that reacted to any metal object with slow, patient corrosion. Our mission was simple on paper: recover one live specimen of the dominant local organism, study its biology, determine whether it posed any threat to nearby colonies, and release nothing back into open space until every test came back clean. Claire led the containment team that pulled the creature up from the surface. I remember watching the recovery feed from the bridge, the specimen curling and uncurling inside its transport sphere like a slow, thinking storm cloud. It was beautiful, in an unsettling way. Veins of dull violet light pulsing beneath a skin that shifted texture depending on what it touched. Grace, our lead biologist, called it magnificent. Daniel called it the ugliest thing he had ever seen. I kept my opinion to myself, mostly because, every time I looked directly at the containment feed, something low and old in my chest tightened without asking permission. Claire was the only one who studied it without flinching. She spent hours in Biolab 4 running scans, adjusting its containment field, taking small samples of the mist it exhaled when its containment sphere pulsed with light. She kept notes on its behavior, the way a doctor keeps notes on a nervous patient, gentle, careful, patient in return. I asked her once, during a quiet shift, why she volunteered for postings like this one. Nobody forces a medic onto a specimen retrieval mission. It is not required duty. She could have stayed on a hospital ship somewhere calm, treating routine injuries, never once standing within reach of something that could dissolve hull plating. She thought about the question longer than I expected before answering. Because somebody has to, she said. Every other species on this ship can smell the danger before I can even see it. That means when something goes wrong, they run first and ask questions never. I do not get that warning. So instead of running, I look. Somebody has to be the one who looks. I did not understand her then either. I understand her a great deal better now. The morning it happened started like any other. I logged comm traffic between the bridge and the surface team. Grace ran diagnostics on the containment field surrounding Biolab 4. Daniel worked on a minor power fluctuation in the secondary reactor. Nothing urgent, the kind of small technical puzzle he genuinely seemed to enjoy. Claire was inside the lab, running her daily scan of the specimen's vital signs. Nobody expected the interlock to fail. It had been tested 11 times since the specimen came aboard. 11 clean results. Nobody expected the 12th attempt to be different. I was standing in the observation corridor when the seal hissed open, and everything I have already told you happened in the span of maybe 4 seconds. The alarm, the fear, the stampede down the corridor. The bulkhead falling half a second early, trapping Claire and me inside with a creature that had just proven it could dissolve reinforced hull plating during its escape. I pressed myself against the far wall, as far from the creature as the sealed corridor allowed, which was not far at all. My translator kept lagging, turning my panic into broken fragments of speech. Claire ignored me entirely, her full attention fixed on the creature rippling across the deck between us. "It is bleeding light," she said, more to herself than to me. "Look at the pulse pattern along its side. That rhythm is wrong. That is not aggression. That is pain signaling." I could not see what she saw. All I could see was a shape built by nature to be feared, moving toward the only 2 living things left in the corridor. She crouched low, the way I imagined she must have learned to approach frightened patients long before she ever left her homeworld, slow and deliberate, hands visible, movements unhurried. The creature's rippling slowed as she approached, though I could not tell whether that meant it was calming down or simply gathering itself for something worse. "Doctor," I whispered, "please." "I am fine," she said, not unkindly. "Stay still. Do not run. Running looks like prey behavior to almost everything alive, and right now, I need it to see me as anything other than prey." I stayed still because I genuinely could not make my body do anything else. Every instinct told me that stillness in the presence of danger was its own kind of death sentence, but somehow her calm cut through the panic, just enough to keep my feet planted. She reached the creature's side. Up close, I could see what she had described from a distance, a pulse of light traveling along a long scorched line across its flank, the mark left by the containment field during its escape. The field had burned it. Whatever it was made of, however unfamiliar its biology, it had been hurt, and pain had driven it out of containment far more than any hunger or aggression had. Claire reached into her kit and drew out a second hypospray, this one loaded with a compound she must have prepared days earlier, some general-purpose neutralizer designed to calm inflamed tissue in species we barely understood. I watched her check the readout twice before she moved any closer. her hands steady in a way that made no sense to me given what stood in front of her. The creature's surface rippled again as she reached toward it, and every part of me expected the corridor to end in disaster. I braced for the worst, my back pressed so hard against the wall that the metal dug into my shoulder blades. Instead, the creature went still. Claire pressed the hypospray gently against the scorched line on its flank and released the dose. The pulsing light along its skin slowed, then steadied into something calmer, something closer to a resting rhythm. She kept one hand resting lightly against its surface, murmuring something too quiet for my translator to catch, words that were probably meaningless to the creature, but seemed to steady her own hands as much as anything. I stood frozen against the wall for what felt like an hour, but was probably only a few minutes. The creature curled slowly inward, the frantic rippling replaced by slow, deliberate breathing, if breathing was even the right word for what it was doing. By the time the containment team finally cut through the sealed bulkhead, fully suited in hazard armor, prepared for the worst outcome imaginable, they found Claire sitting cross-legged on the deck, one hand resting on the creature's flank, calmly reading numbers off a handheld scanner, as though she were checking vitals on any ordinary patient in any ordinary hospital ward. I remember the look on the containment team leader's face when he pulled back his visor and saw the scene in front of him. He looked at Claire, then at the creature, then back at Claire, as if his mind refused to accept what his eyes were reporting. "You walked up to a Class 9, he said slowly. "Alone." She did not look up from her scanner. It was not alone. Vey was here. I appreciated the gesture, though we both knew I had spent most of that encounter pressed against a wall, unable to move. They moved the creature back into a repaired containment field within the hour, its vitals stable, its pulsing light steady and calm. Grace ran a full diagnostic on it that evening, and confirmed what Claire had already guessed from instinct and observation alone. The escape had never been an attack. It had been a wounded creature, searching blindly for relief from pain, lashing out at containment walls, not out of aggression, but out of desperation. Command issued Claire a formal commendation 2 days later, the kind of recognition typically reserved for acts of exceptional bravery under fire. She seemed almost embarrassed by the ceremony, standing stiffly at attention while the captain read out the citation in front of the assembled crew. "I do not think I did anything especially brave," she told me afterward, once the formal proceedings had ended and the corridor outside the briefing room had emptied. "I was simply not afraid. That is different from bravery. Bravery is doing something difficult while every part of you screams to stop. I never got the scream in the first place." I turned that distinction over in my mind for a long time afterward. Perhaps she was right, and what she had done was not bravery in the way my own people define it, but standing in a corridor sealed shut with a creature that could dissolve reinforced hull plating requires something, whether we call it bravery or simple absence of fear. Whatever word fits, it saved both our lives, and it saved the creature's as well, a creature that would otherwise have been destroyed by containment protocol the moment the bulkhead reopened. Protocol that exists precisely because nobody expects a Class 9 encounter to end any other way. In the days that followed, I found myself watching Claire more closely during her rounds through the ship's medical bay. She treated every patient the same way, whether they were human, tesserine like myself, or any of the dozen other species serving aboard the long correlation. She approached each case with the same steady patience, the same willingness to look closely at something the rest of us instinctively wanted to avoid. I asked her one evening, while she catalogued samples taken from the creature's recovery, whether every human medic approached danger the way she did, or whether her calm was simply part of her own particular character. She considered the question carefully before answering, setting down the sample vial in her hand. "I think it varies," she said. "Some of my colleagues feel fear in other ways, worry about outcomes, worry about making the wrong call, worry about losing a patient. Fear does not disappear from human minds entirely. It simply does not attach itself to certain triggers the way it does for other species. We are not fearless. We are only blind to a specific kind of warning that the rest of the galaxy relies on for survival. That blindness," she explained, "cuts both ways. Humans have walked into situations that killed them precisely because they could not smell the danger the way a tesserine or a kethrani could. Entire early exploration teams had been lost on worlds where the local atmosphere carried warning signals invisible to human senses. Humanity's calm in the face of biological threat was not a gift bestowed by nature. It was closer to an old wound that had simply healed crooked, leaving behind both a vulnerability and, in rare cases like Claire's, an unusual kind of steadiness. "That is why you get sent to the difficult postings," I said, understanding settling into place slowly, the way understanding often does. "Not because your lives matter less, because you can walk into rooms the rest of us cannot make ourselves enter." She smiled slightly at that, setting the last sample into its storage rack. Something like that. Someone has to look closely at the things everyone else runs from. It might as well be someone who is not currently drowning in fear while they do it. 3 weeks later, the long correlation received clearance to release the creature back into a fully monitored preserve on its home planet. Its wound long healed, its vitals steady, its behavior calm under observation. Grace led the release team down to the surface, and I watched the recovery feed from the bridge once more, this time without the tight, old fear pressing against my chest. The creature drifted slowly out of its transport sphere and into the pale spore storms of its home world, its violet pulses of light steady and unhurried, nothing at all like the frantic, wounded movement I remembered from that corridor. Grace reported that it lingered near the release site for several minutes before finally moving off into the mist, as though it understood, in whatever way such a creature could understand anything, that it had been helped rather than harmed. I found Claire afterward in the observation corridor outside Biolab 4, the same corridor where everything had happened 3 weeks earlier. The bulkhead stood open now, the interlock repaired and tested a full 20 times before anyone trusted it again. She was simply standing there, looking through the viewport toward the planet below, her expression thoughtful rather than triumphant. I asked her whether she ever thought about what might have happened if the neutralizer had not worked, if her read on the creature's behavior had been wrong, if pain rather than aggression had not been the true explanation after all. She was quiet for a moment before answering. "Of course I thought about it. I think about it every time I walk towards something the rest of the crew is running from, but thinking about what might go wrong is not the same as being ruled by it. If I let every possible bad outcome stop me, before I even looked closely enough to understand the actual situation, I would never help anyone. I would just be another person running down the corridor with everyone else, and that creature would be dead, and probably several other members of this crew along with it." I thought about my own frozen stillness in that corridor, the way my body had locked itself against the wall, refusing every command my mind tried to send it. I thought about Daniel and Grace and the security officers, all of them running on pure ancient instinct the moment the alarm sounded, instinct built across countless generations to keep their ancestors alive on dangerous worlds. None of us had done anything wrong. We had simply done what evolution built us to do, exactly as our bodies were designed. And Claire had done something else entirely, not because she was better or braver in any simple sense, but because she was built differently, missing a warning system the rest of the galaxy depends on, and somehow that absence had turned into a strange kind of gift, one that let her walk calmly into the one place none of the rest of us could make ourselves go. I do not know if I will ever fully understand how humans manage to look so steadily at the things that send every other species running. Perhaps understanding it fully is not the point. Perhaps it is enough to know that somewhere in this galaxy, on ships like the Long Correlation, there are people like Claire Bennett who walk toward the danger the rest of us flee from, not out of recklessness, but out of the simple, steady belief that somebody has to look closely enough to understand what is actually happening before deciding what to do about it. That belief saved a creature's life. It saved my life too, and I have never forgotten it, not for one single day since.